I want to talk to you about Chanuka, the Festival of Lights, and how it is that we don't have a clear story of exactly how it transpired. And why is that? But first, I have to talk to you about threes. That's my favorite number. And in Hanukkah, where do you find threes? Is in the changes that we make to the services. Every day during the services, in the centerpiece of the services, that's the Amida, where we ask God for what we want, we include a special extra paragraph, Al Hadisim, about the miracles that God did for us at the time of Hanukkah. And then after that section, we go to Hallel, which is a series of praises for God. It's also a prayer that we say on other occasions, but we added it to Hanukkah on every service. We add the Hallel too. And then the third thing we do is we read from the Torah scroll, which is also something we do normally, but here we do it every day of Hanukkah, and we read from a particular section, and that section is when the temple was originally dedicated, because on Hanukkah we rededicated the temple. That's the three changes to the service. The fourth thing, of course, is lighting the menorah. Everybody lights the candles or the oil lamps in their own menorah to celebrate the miracle of the oil. What was that? There was an Assyrian empire that took control of the land of Israel and was of Greek culture, and they used the Greek culture. They wanted everybody under their empire to follow the rules of the Greek culture. That way everybody would stay in line and become citizens, common citizens of a great empire. However, the Greek culture was one of physical adoration. They adored the physical beauties, the physical body, architecture, the human anatomy, and things of that nature, things you could see. What you see is what you get. That's what they believed in. And it makes sense because, let's work with what we see. The Jews, however, were of a different persuasion. They felt there was a spiritual world that you don't see, but we know about it through revelation. It's an interesting discussion, not for now, but whether we have begun to see that spiritual world, the spiritual forces that affect us to make us anxiety-driven or depressed or hypermanic and other psychological issues that we've uncovered. Maybe those are the things we're trying to correct with the spiritual rules. It's another discussion. However, we were definitely convinced that we have a soul, that there's something deeper inside, there's something more than just the physical side of life, that humans are more than animals, and we didn't want to lose that. The Greeks, in order to assert their physical control, they disallowed the Jewish people from keeping the Shabbat, the Sabbath, was a spiritual day. They disallowed circumcision, disfiguring of the human body, and they disallowed us from keeping our own calendar, which we did by declaring the new moon. They also disallowed the entire temple service because that was, spiritually oriented, and defiled everything in the temple. Until finally a group of Kohens, priests, a family called the Maccabees, they revolted and they formed a guerrilla warfare against the superpower of the day, really. That's what they were. And they were successful, eventually succeeded in driving them out of the land and regaining sovereignty that lasted about 200 years and control of the temple. They went in and they restarted the service. Now, one of the services they wanted to do was to relight the menorah, the candelabra, the seven-branch candelabra that's in the temple. But in order to do that, you need spiritually pure olive oil. And the Greeks had defiled all of the olive oil on the premises until they did find one cruse, one vial of that was sealed with the seal of the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, and that meant that the oil inside was still spiritually pure. And so they had what to light the menorah, but it was only enough to last one day. And it would take them a total of 8 days to get more oil. So what happened was there was a miracle that happened, that the oil that was only good for one day burned for 8 days. That's the miracle we celebrate. So in this story, I have three levels of questions. The first question is, why did they need 8 days to get more oil? And two answers are given. One answer is that the source of the spiritually pure oil was 4 days distance. They have to travel 4 days to get there, then they need 4 days to get back. So they would have to wait 8 days until they got a new supply of spiritually pure oil, and that's what happened. That answer is suspect because they could have prepared in advance. They knew where they were on the verge of winning, and olives are plentiful all over Israel. They could have made new oil. Why did they have to go especially to that place? The other answer given is that they were all spiritually impure because of the war. They had all come in contact with dead bodies, either killed them themselves or touched a dead body or walked over a dead body or a grave or been inside a building in which a dead body was. All these things would make you spiritually impure. And then the only way to recover from that state is to go through a 7-day process with the ashes of the red heifer, which is a whole mysterious process described in the Torah, but it takes 7 days. And so they had to wait. They started right away to become pure, but then they would have to wait 7 days till they're pure, and then on the 8th day, they would be able to make fresh oil and have it ready at the end of the 8th day. So meanwhile, they needed 8 days. That also is suspect because if they were spiritually impure, how did they even go in to the temple to light the menorah? Because you're really not allowed to go in if you're spiritually impure. Now, some answers are given and they work, but you have to rely on certain conditions to make the answer work. Another question that's asked, the second level of question, is why do we celebrate 8 days of miracle when really there was only 7 days of miracle? Because they did find a vial of oil that was enough for 1 day, and so the other 7 days that it burned were miraculous, but not the first day. Why do we celebrate 8 days? We should only be having a 7-day holiday. And several answers are given. I'm going to give you 6 of the most famous. And the first one is that they were celebrating the fact that they could once again circumcise their baby boys on the 8th day of their life, which is the preferred time, and because of the 8th, so to commemorate that, we make it 8 days. That answer is suspect because we don't mention circumcision very much in the services or when we light the candles or anything. There's no reference to it. Number 2, the second answer given is that it was a miracle that they found the oil in the first place, because the Greeks were intent on defiling all the vials of oil that existed, and so just finding it was a miracle. The problem with that answer is that every time you find something that's a miracle, it's people lose things, they overlook things, and you find them, and it's hard to say that every time it's a miracle. It could have been that somebody overlooked it. Happens. The third answer is that the vial that they found had actually absorbed some of the oil into its walls, and really there was not enough oil for a full day, and so a miracle happened even that first day that it burned the entire length of time that they needed. The trouble with that answer is that these containers were especially designed to contain enough oil for 1 day. That's why they had the seal of the high priest on them, because they were prepared in advance, and they would take out 1 vial every day and fill up the menorah, the candelabra. So that's suspect. Fourth answer given is that one way or another, the fourth answer given is they only poured in 1/8 of the oil that they found into the candelabra, and so every day 1/8 of the oil burned miraculously the entire night, which is makes for sure a miracle of every day. But the trouble with that answer is, why would they do that? Or how could they take license to do that? You have a mitzvah, an instruction in the Torah that you want to perform, and that is to light the candelabra for the entire night. So you pour in oil, you have the oil, so do it what you have. You can't rely on miracles when you go to perform a Torah instruction, a mitzvah. So they should have really used it all up. So that answer is not entirely convincing. The fifth answer is that one way or another, they used miraculous oil in the following manner. Either they poured out of the container the oil into the candelabra and they were finished. The container was miraculously still full of oil. And so they had enough for the next day, and that so on continued every day. And or if it didn't work that way, then they poured all the oil into the candelabra, it burned all night. When they came back, the oil was still there. It miraculously reappeared in the menorah, so they had enough for the next day, and so on. So either way it worked. The trouble with this answer is that you're relying on miraculously appearing oil. The mitzvah, the Torah instruction is to take olive oil and put it in a menorah and burn it, not miracle oil or whatever it is. You don't know what it is. If it comes from a miracle, so you don't know that it's olive oil. You don't know what it is. So that's the problem with that solution. And the sixth answer is the miracle of the war. The fact that they won the war against the superpower of the day itself was a miracle, and so we have to celebrate that miracle. The trouble with that answer is that we have, at least today, experience probably all through history, but today we have current examples of small bands able to defeat large armies. Thinking first of the Vietnam experience, where America was basically had to hightail out of Vietnam, even though it was a small country, and they had poured so many resources in there. They were not victorious. And now today, similar thing is happening in Afghanistan. They just can't seem to get rid of the Taliban. So it's not such a miracle that a small band is over. If you're devoted and dedicated, you know the landscape, whatever. So it's not that unusual. You can't necessarily call it a miracle that they won the war. Now, some answer that to this that's exactly why God arranged it for the miracle of the oil to take place, because people were saying that the war, just we were lucky, we were fortunate, we were stronger, or we were not stronger, but we were more clever, more agile, whatever excuses are given. We have the same thing with the Six-Day War in our recent Jewish history. A lot of people felt that the Jews were more devoted to the task. The Arabs were made many mistakes. They weren't organized, and they got caught with their pants down. And so we were able to take control. And it's only later, over time, that we find that there were so many miracles that happened, that people testified in certain incidents, that we see that really the Six-Day War was a miracle. So the same thing back then. Rather than to have people think that the war was not a miracle, God provided the miracle of the oil, which nobody could deny, that one day's worth is burning oil days, and that way the war, it was also a miracle. But a third level of question is that they ask on this is that the emphasis on the war comes from an ancient book called Megillus Tainis, which is the scroll of the fast days, and it also talks about feast days in there. And there it describes on how what a great victory the war was, and emphasizes the war as the main event of Chanuka. Whereas, but that is not a ancient book that we really go to for instructions on how to live and use it as a template. The one we use is the Talmud, and the Talmud emphasizes the oil miracle, talks mostly about the oil miracle. And so the question's asked, why doesn't our Talmud mention the war? Well, I saw an answer to this question that literally threw me for a loop. It almost threw me off the chair, because it didn't make sense at all. It said that the reason our Talmud does not deal with the war is because the war was transitory, it didn't last. The Maccabees themselves were killed out soon and died not a nice death, and then the sovereignty that they regained only lasted about 200 years, and then again we went into exile and have been so for thousands of years. Whereas the oil, it said that was a lasting thing that we celebrate every year. What are you talking about? The only reason it's lasting every year is because we're celebrating that miracle, but the miracle itself only took place 1 year, whereas the war, the results of the war lasted for 200 years. We were sovereign in our own nation. We had control of the temple. So it's just the reverse. So I saw a beautiful explanation of this by Eliyahu Kitov in his Sefer Todah, originally Hebrew, now it's in English, Book of Our Heritage, where he says that it's the difference is between what the war represented and what the oil represented. The war represented a physical achievement. Physical achievements die out. They are by nature transitory. Something else will come about and overcome it. Whereas the spiritual, that has lasting power. And what spiritual element are we talking about? The ability of the Jewish people, or at least a few Jewish people, a select few, to resist the temptation of foreign cultures. And we have done this all through our history. We've had foreign cultures trying to influence us right, left, and center. And we've lost a lot of people along the way. We're an ancient culture. We should be as many in number as the Chinese, or at least the Muslims or the Christians, which are close to 1 billion each. We're just 16 million. And the reason is because we've lost so many people along the way. True, some of them were slaughtered in wars, but many of them just dropped off the wayside because they were influenced by foreign cultures. Even to this day, we have a tremendous intermarriage rate. We're losing people from our culture at a tremendous rate. But nevertheless, there were always, in every generation, there were those that preserved the faith, the conviction that there was something more than the physical world, more than just being an animal at large in the world, that we are humans, we have a spiritual side, we have a soul, we have a whole spiritual world that affects us, that we should interact with, that we can be sensitive to and grow with. That's our message, and the fact that we have been able to keep that message alive and promote it in the face of all these onslaughts of foreign cultures, that itself is the miracle that we're celebrating as we go forward. We still need that miracle today to resist the attractions of the physical world, even though today we have such a flowering of Jewish practice and Jewish scholarship. Almost in every country you'll go, you'll see it. And we also have Israel today, which gives us security like we haven't had in thousands of years. Nevertheless, even with that, people are shedding their Jewish identity in record numbers. And even the religious fall prey to the blandishments of physical attractions. I'll give you an example that may astound you, but think about it. The adulation that we have for sports, the time we spend on it. You know, the Greeks invented the Olympics and we brought it back. It was a big mistake. Why do countries celebrate that their athletes won a gold medal? It makes them somehow more prosperous or more advanced in their civilization. They could be among the worst of the worst, and still, if they win a gold medal, they feel it's all okay. It makes no sense. People that have their favorite sports teams, the same thing. They spend so much focus on their team, they celebrate when they win. It has no bearing on their real life. It has nothing to do with their welfare. So it's nonsense. It makes no sense. Another thing that we've let into our lives is the tendency to be worried about the future, to have angst, to be afraid that the wolf is always around the corner. The current darling is climate change. There's been doom and gloom stories all through history. We've overcome all of them. Today, with climate change, I don't know if it's real or not, but we have to have the confidence that we'll be able to deal with it when it becomes a real problem. And just like the Maccabees, when they started, they had to have confidence. They did what they could do at the time, and the rest is up to God. And that's the Jewish attitude. And Chanuka underscores that, because all these things that we do about Chanuka, such as thanking God a special prayer and singing the praises of God and reading about the dedication, the original dedication of the temple that helps us rededicate the temple of our lives, all this is to remind us that there's a God running the world. That's how it benefits us. And so we need that reminder that there's a God running the world, because God we can't see, we can't hear, we can't feel, we can't touch. And so we tend to forget all the time. We tend to forget that he's there running things. And he's running them for our better benefit, that it'll work out well. It'll work out beautifully. And this explains why Chanuka, we're not sure exactly how it transpired. That's exactly the point. Because Chanuka is there to remind us that we don't know how the future is going to unfold. We don't know all the answers. We're just sure that there will be a way that works out, because God's running the world. And that miracle that God helps us will continue. Have a happy Chanuka.